All right, if everybody wants to kind of take their seats for the panel, I think we'll get started because we've got 5 presenters today, and I'd like to be able to give them enough time to get through their presentations. But the title of the panel today is Tinkering with the Tube, Television and Technologies. And what I'm going to do is probably just gracefully step out of the way and hand over the time to our presenters today. I think we're just going to go through the list as they appear in the program, with the exception of one switch. We're just going to be switching Deborah Tudor's presentation with Bryce Peake. So Bryce will present last, but everyone can introduce themselves as they come up to the podium. So without further ado, presenting first is Raul Reis, distinguished alumnus of the University of Oregon, and Raul.
Let's see. There we go. Thank you, Ben, and thank you all for being here. It's Saturday afternoon, so I have to commend you for your commitment to the conference and wanting to learn more about this topic. My name is Raul Reis. I'm one of the, as Ben was saying, I was actually part of the first doctoral class of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication of the University of Oregon back in the early 90s. I've since, I worked in California for a while. I'm now in Florida, at Florida International University. And actually, the idea for this panel, this paper, came from my own connection to Latin America, especially Brazil. I grew up in Brazil. I was a journalist in Brazil. I worked for television over there as a reporter. And I kind of try to follow what's going on in Latin America. There is a lot of talk about the growth in the markets in Latin America. Also, the economies have, for the most part, are stable and growing in Latin America, especially where I live in Florida, in Miami. There is a lot of influx of South American, Latin American immigrants, and that's you have the big corporations now looking into, we've talked a lot throughout the weekend about markets and about audiences, and audiences as markets, as commodities, and now this all this talk about kind of the Latin America Hispanic market in the U.S. growing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about specifically digital television as kind of a technological advancement, and how some of the challenges that and the difficulties in kind of expanding that technology to Latin America, but also some of the opportunities that are kind of embedded in adopting or expanding that technology. So just very briefly, digital TV, I'm not sure how much you guys know about this. Of course, I'm assuming that all of you know that we have switched completely in the U.S. to digital TV since 2009. June of 2009, we made the switch, and it's final. All the transmission of television now in the U.S. is made through digital methodologies. Used to be analog, as we heard a lot about the history and everything, how it started. But digital transmission allows broadcasters to free up a lot of space in the broadcast spectrum, which is particularly attractive for government, for example, in terms of expanding and allotting the space to other entities, governmental entities, and also improves image and sound quality and allows for interactivity. There has been a lot of talk in this conference about interactivity, if it's a possibility, if it's a failure, but digital TV kind of presupposes that we are going to move in that particular direction. Research into digital transmission has been going on for decades. Production has switched to digital a long time ago, but it wasn't until 10 years ago in the 2000s that technological improvements made the adoption of digital TV feasible on a large scale, meaning the networks. And then 2009, as I was saying, in June of 2009, all over the air, broadcast signals in the U.S. are not only produced but also transmitted digitally. Most viewers in the U.S., however, they receive their TV signals through cable or satellite, 90%, so it's a pretty high rate, which made the switch to digital TV almost like a non-event. Everybody's getting cable, everybody has digital broadcast satellite TV, so it didn't make a big difference unless you had a really old TV receiver, so you had to buy your little box to put in on top of the converter to put on top of the TV. In Latin America, however, pay TV is still a luxury for most people, only affordable to a very small part of the population. So that creates another difficulty for switching the digital TV signal. The broadcasters, everybody's paying attention to what's going to happen because of that and the impact that it can create. So for that reason, one of the reasons why digital TV has been very slow to take off in Latin America. To give you an idea, commercial use of digital TV started in the U.S. and the U.K. back in 1998 when the first channels were assigned to places like the British Sky Broadcasting System. In Latin America, in countries like Brazil, it had started in 1996 when DirecTV was. So we started 2 years earlier, but that didn't make any difference at all. Being the first in that case didn't make any difference because back in 2006, for example, 10 years later, only 6 million households in all of Latin America received digital signals through pay TV, and the population is 560 million people. So you can have a sense that digital TV until recently was very small indeed in Latin America. So the number keeps growing. Almost 25% of all TV households in Latin America receive digital TV signals by 2010, up from 16.5% in 2009. So you can see this amazing growth. But the question remains, when you have pay TV and over the air, and you have this imbalance in the way people receive the signal, what is going to be the impact of digital television? And basically, what happened is now digital TV is starting to make an impact in Latin America because it's being adopted very slowly by over-the-air broadcasters. 64 million digital homes should be added between 2010 and 2016, only 6 years. So of those, more than half will come from over-the-air broadcast signals as opposed to 31 million for pay TV. So it means that a lot of people will still have analog TV even with the penetration of digital signals. But what's happening now in Latin America, as the economies, the national economies keep rising and growing, pay TV probably will be expanding in the next few years. So it's expected to reach a 46% penetration by 2016, up for 30% 2 years ago. Argentina has the highest pay TV penetration at 77%, while Brazil has the lowest. But because of the sheer size of the country, Brazil still has the biggest market for pay TV in terms of the revenues that are being generated. So that gives you, also you can compare Latin America to the U.S. The total in Latin America, even in 2012, this year, is about a fifth of pay TV digital households in the U.S. So you can see how this technology is not necessarily as widespread in countries like Argentina and Brazil and Chile that are doing really well economically, but it's still not something that the broadcasters are investing in. And that's kind of one of the biggest differences, really. It's a matter of political political will, it doesn't really appeal to. There is a lot of monopoly of television television broadcasting in Latin America. It doesn't really appeal to this essentially family-owned companies to invest in new technologies unless they have to, unless they are forced to. So that's the reality. So just to give you a sense of what the situation is in Brazil, by far the largest TV market in Latin America. Digital over-the-air transmission started in 2007 in Brazil, but you can see just how many households, 1.7 million in 2006, and these were all pay TV households. And it has grown to 5.5 million, which is still a very small part of the TV households in the country. So there is a booming economy and more TV stations all over the country adopting digital TV. So it is expected to grow all the way up to 43 million by the end of 2016. However, about 16.7 million households, one-third of those, will still be receiving analog signals. Some of the challenges, I don't have a lot of time. I have a lot. Now that I'm getting to the challenges and the opportunities, I guess I should have gone a little faster. But there are a lot of challenges for the adoption. One of them being the fact that all the countries in Latin America, they decided to opt for different models. There are 4 different digital television models, the U.S. ATSC being one of them. There is the Japanese model, the European model, and the Chinese model. And the countries in Latin America, for different reasons, mostly economic reasons, collaboration between industry and governments, they adopted different models. For example, Mexico and Central America, they adopted the ATSC model, which is the U.S. and Canada, Canadian model, the North American. In Brazil, they adopted the Japanese model because of this kind of historical collaboration between Brazil and Japan in technology. Some other countries adopted the European model for the same reason, for collaborating with different countries in Europe on the technology. So that's one of the major. The other ones, as I said, digital TV does nothing to break the monopolies in Latin America, which is a really sad thing. One of the opportunities, just to wrap up on a more positive note, one of the opportunities that I see with the adoption of digital TV in Latin America is the fact that the internet is growing, but it hasn't grown. The penetration of internet in Brazil, for example, and other Latin American countries is still not as high as it is in the U.S. Digital TV actually gives the opportunity for broadcasters, for nonprofit organizations, for community activists, for social movements to actually use digital TV as kind of a internet in a box, as they call it. There is a big potential for actually bypassing the computer. And since people, for example, penetration of TV households in Brazil is 98.7, almost 99% of the population. So basically, everybody who wants a TV, unless they are very remote in the Amazon jungle, they probably have a TV set. So it gives the opportunity, if well used, to kind of bypass the whole computer and use the television and the digital TV capabilities and technology to actually be a connection and a window to the internet and the world. So I see that as a positive or a hopeful tool in terms of education and raising socioeconomic standards, raising educational training of the population, etc., and also kind of strengthening and fortified social movements, grassroots movements, activism, etc. So I wanted to finish on a positive note, but there are a lot of challenges. I didn't even go through them, but we can have a discussion later. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Raul. And next we're going to be moving on to Doris Baltruschat from the University of British Columbia, Canada. So.
I see right and then. All right, thank you kindly. Good afternoon and welcome to my presentation on 3D TV, just another dimension of viewing television. Television audiences now have the opportunity to experience their favorite programming on multiple screens, be it in the traditional at-home setting or via digital distribution platforms like the internet and mobile devices. In addition, transmedia innovations increasingly augment the viewing experience by extending storylines into online environments via chat rooms, social networking sites, Twitter feeds, and alternate reality games. With recent innovations in 3D entertainment, television has now added another dimension, 3D programming, to its digital convergent universe. It may be surprising to learn that the invention of 3D actually precedes the arrival of 2D cinema and television. Discovered in 1838, it arrived nearly 50 years before conventional cinema made its first mark at the turn of the century. The inventor of 3D imaging was Charles Wheatstone, who created a device called the reflecting mirror stereoscope that you see here. It utilized two centered mirrors at 45 degrees to each eye and reflected right and left eye images. The device could present depth but no movement. Another type of stereoscope was popularized by Oliver Wendell Holmes. The stereoscope was composed of two pictures mounted next to each other. Each picture was taken from a slightly different viewpoint. When the pictures were observed through a special viewer, the pair of two-dimensional pictures merged together into a single three-dimensional photograph. It became the most common type of stereoscope from 1881 until the 1930s, when stereoscope production declined, largely due to the new interest in motion pictures. However, this early type of stereoscope remains popular in the Viewmaster. The first 3D movies were screened in New York and Los Angeles, like The Power of Love from 1922. These films were shown using dual projectors. However, with the onset of the Great Depression, the production of 3D slowed down. Then in the early 1950s, the golden age of 3D entertainment arrived with films such as Bwana Devil, It Came From Outer Space, Kiss Me Kate, and House of Wax. Most of the Hollywood studios jumped onto the 3D bandwagon, from the five majors like MGM, Paramount, and Warner Brothers, to the smaller ones such as RKO, United Artists, and Universal. The best 3D films were delivered by Warner Brothers, including the classic Dial M for Murder by Alfred Hitchcock. The smaller studios, such as Universal, made most of its 3D movies in black and white, such as the gimmick Aladdin Creature from the Black Lagoon. Just going to give you a presentation of Anaglyph 3D now. The Creature from the Black Lagoon is about a scientific expedition searching for a prehistoric beast that lurks in the depths of the Amazonian jungle. When the group of scientists tries to capture the mysterious creature and tries to bring it back to civilization for study, it breaks free. And the creature, of course, falls in love with the lovely Kay, and sort of, the story unfolds from there. In 1953, Alfred Hitchcock reluctantly agreed to make Dial M for Murder in 3D, noting that the technology was limiting rather than expanding narrative possibilities. However, in contrast to other 3D feature films of the time, Hitchcock did not use the technology for cheap gimmicks, but rather created a certain amount of depth throughout the film. In the crucial murder scene of the film, Hitchcock used 3D to startle the viewer when the victim's hand, Margot, played by Grace Kelly, reaches out into the audience space to grab a weapon to defend herself. Here, Hitchcock used 3D to provide a greater physical presence and additional dramatic force to the object. Unfortunately, Dial M for Murder was released towards the end of the initial 3D boom and played mostly in flat 2D, even in the 1950s. In the late 1950s, audience fascination with 3D declined because most of the films had poor production values, bad scripts, and used 3D technology mostly for few surprise effects and gimmicks. So I've presented you with Anaglyph 3D, and I just want to let you know how it works briefly. So in a nutshell, stereoscopic imaging is based on capturing a pair of two-dimensional images and then separately delivering them to the left eye and the right eye. 3D movies are actually not three-dimensional, but rely on visual clues to the human brain to trigger depth stimuli, which translate into an illusion of 3D perception. To create these conditions, each scene requires the use of two cameras, one recording for the left eye and one recording for the right eye. In the theater, images are then projected that represent either the left or the right eye point of view. Continuing with our timeline now, in the early 1980s, stereoscopic cinema experienced the brief revival with blockbuster hits like Friday the 13th and Jaws in 3D, only to fade into the background again for another 3 decades. We are now in the second revival of 3D features, and it seems that this time, this is the point of my paper, that this time 3D media are going to stay. It began with the arrival of a new generation of more technically advanced 3D films, such as James Cameron's documentary Ghost of the Abyss, The Polar Express in IMAX 3D, U2 concerts in 3D, and Avatar, of course. Indeed, 2010 marked the tipping point for 3D entertainment with the standardization of 3D technologies, the success of Avatar, and the dramatic increase of 3D movies in the cinema, which were then released on 3D Blu-ray players so they could be enjoyed at home around the television set. 3D increases movie revenues despite overall declining attendance of movie theaters. More specifically, 50 to 70% of box office revenues are generated through 3D and its premium charge. 3D movies generate 2 to 3 times the revenue of a 2D feature. Film producers have a strong incentive, therefore, to make 3D a success in order to facilitate the continuing rollout of 3D, which will lead to the implementation of an estimated 3,300 screens in the US alone. These additional screens are needed to avoid the bottleneck for the release of new 3D features. In addition, positive reception of a film is likely to translate into profitable DVD sales. Avatar was the top-selling DVD of 2010. DVD sales remain an important revenue stream for the film industry because they have had the capacity to generate more than half of the revenue for some films in the past. To avoid similar mistakes that were made during previous 3D eras, industry experts emphasized the importance of quality 3D. Consumers will not pay a premium for 3D features that are not top-rate and suffer from poor 2D to 3D conversion. Indeed, a great variety of classic films are now being converted from 2D to 3D, just like Titanic, The Lord of the Rings, and the Star Wars trilogy. A key element in this new phase in 3D technology and media is the degree of depth and immersive capacity that enhances the overall 3D experience. Today, directors and cinematographers seek to heighten the emotional undercurrent of 3D media. In the case of the animated 3D feature Coraline, a depth score was used to find depth events and to maximize the 3D effect. This has implications, I believe, for branded entertainment, which is increasingly part of the mainstream media experience. It is likely that this type of depth scoring, I speculate, will soon also be applied to product placements in film, television programs, and other multimedia. In a commercially driven media landscape, the implications for foregrounding branded entertainment are manifold. We could imagine an advertised breakfast cereal box popping out right in front of our eyes, seemingly being able to be grabbed out of thin air. It is also likely that we will enter a new era of heightened commercialism and advertising that may be more persuasive and engaging than ever before. With increased viewer interactivity, we will be able then to buy that advertised item floating in front of our eyes with the click of a button on our remote control. This emphasis on depth experience, immersive worlds, and branded entertainment in 3D today sets it apart from previous 3D phases in the 1950s and 1980s, which used the technology mainly for gimmicks and cheap effects. Therefore, this new phase in 3D has been compared to the transition from sound to talkies and from black and white movies to color. In the later, the need to draw audiences into the theater space was heightened by the introduction of the new competing medium, television. Equally challenging for the industry today has been the development of multiple platforms and varied sizes of screens, from IMAX to mobile screens, which have been competing for traditional movie theater audiences. In addition, 3D is now being rolled out across media platforms, from large screen cinema screens, the television set, game consoles, the internet, and the mobile phone. The arrival of 3D TV, therefore, has to be seen within the context of 3D entertainment across the field. Increasingly, we see event programming, such as live concerts, concert films, and sports events in 3D. These are shown often in the cinema as well as on television. This year, the BBC will broadcast the London Olympics in 3D, in the hope that the Olympics will do for 3D television what Avatar did for 3D cinema. Special events program also includes 2D to 3D conversions, such as the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's documentary of Queen Elizabeth II in 3D, which aired in 2010. Currently, most 3D TV sets require the use of polarized glasses. Polarized lenses block the wavelengths of certain light. When viewing 3D media, two images are displayed that were shot from different angles. Each lens allows only one of the polarized images to go through, thus again creating the illusion of 3D. However, 3D television glasses can be uncomfortable and expensive. In addition, consumers are aware of reports about possible health risks associated with high exposure to a 3D viewing experience. Manufacturers of 3D are aware of these current restrictions and are therefore seeking technological solutions to enjoy the 3D experience without glasses and health risks. There are several current hurdles to the adoption of 3D. First of all, we've just seen the transition from into the flat screen era and also the HD TV sets, so consumers are very reluctant to go out and buy yet another gadget that allows them to play 3D. Also, we have yet to create enough 3D programming and content for the 3D TV experience. About 3,000 hours for programming of 500 films are needed to support a dedicated 3D TV channel. Currently, only about 200 hours and 30 films are available. Nonetheless, we are seeing the launching of 3D TV broadcasting channels throughout the world. For example, the Discovery Channel is experimenting with 3D programming for different types of shows with the aim of becoming a leader in 3D TV production. And in the UK, Sky TV is experimenting with broadcasting soccer games in pubs around London and Manchester. The introduction of 3D home entertainment systems will probably spur adoption of 3D television, especially in view of already existing 3D Blu-ray players and digital sound systems. Another important development relates to 3D video games. Many game players are early adopters of the new technology, especially since 3D-capable game consoles are already in circulation. The growing availability of 3D video games and 3D game consoles will therefore most likely increase the interest in fully immersive games. Innovations in the form of 3D cameras and 3D photography will possibly also grow interest in 3D entertainment in all formats. The next step in user-generated content in 3D will also lead to a generalization of 3D entertainment on 3D YouTube, which already allows users to share images and information via a virtual gallery. And finally, 3D mobile devices already on the market in South Korea will be able to display 3D content from images to videos and games. In comparison to earlier phases of 3D media, then, current indications are that 3D TV is likely here to stay, in spite of the hurdles that I just outlined to you. In other words, the changeover to 3D television will as likely occur as did the transition from black and white to color TV. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So next we'll be moving on to Joe Watson from Baker University.
Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to begin this afternoon in a place where in an ideal world all presentations would begin, and that is at the happiest place on earth. About a year ago, I traveled to Disney World with my wife and daughter, and once we got there, they couldn't wait to get out and find the spinning teacups. I, on the other hand, would have been perfectly content to stay in the room for a couple of hours and watch the Disney cable system, which I guess is a testament to what a TV geek I am. In addition to offering the types of channels you would expect to see on any American hotel system, Disney also offered some interesting options. Channel 55 is Univision, which isn't that surprising given that many American cable systems offer this channel given the large number of Hispanics in the United States. But also they feature on Channel 57 Deutsche Welle, originating from Germany and broadcasting exclusively in German. On Channel 59, Japan TV features a mix of English and Japanese programming exposing Japanese culture. And perhaps most foreign of all to Americans would be Channel 60, CCTV, China Central Television. I've noticed this elsewhere as well. If you've ever spent any time in Las Vegas, they have NHK from Japan, and they have RT, an English language channel from Russia, or produced by Russians. And I've noticed that RT is also on my cable system here in Portland. I understand Portland has a rather large Russian population. So, of course, these cities are both destinations for foreign tourists that these channels would appeal to, and that makes sense. But I think it indicates that clearly the door is open for American cable systems to host foreign television networks. So far, however, we just haven't reached critical mass. So, in addition to cable systems offering tourist destinations, channels like RT, NHK, Deutsche Welle, and CCTV, a network like the BBC is also growing in its presence here in the United States. Not only has it long been available on PBS, but there's BBC America, and more cable systems are starting to include the BBC World News Channel in their lineup. The Internet also plays a significant role. All of the channels on this slide, as well as many more, offer streaming on the Internet. Virtually all of them offer streaming of news content, and a few offer streaming of entertainment programming as well. And then, of course, there are apps from Apple and the iTunes Store. According to the New York Times, as of the middle of last year, there were more than 475,000 applications or apps available to download onto the iPhone or other Apple devices. These are screen captures from my iPhone. I have more than a dozen global radio and television networks that I stream fairly regularly. Some of them I think are worth noting in particular. Al Jazeera English is a channel that is available only on cable systems in 3 states and the District of Columbia. Most Americans don't have access to this channel, but you can download the Al Jazeera English app for free. Those who have watched it believe, and I'm one of them, that it helps us to understand better the Arab culture, a culture which many Americans arguably do not understand and in many cases fear. Another app that is not on here because I captured this a couple of months ago, it's a great one I would recommend called Just Television. And it gathers channels from 44 different countries around the globe that you can stream onto your Apple device. I also happen to have an abundance of German TV networks. I speak really bad German, so it's a great way to immerse myself in the language. But even though I don't speak the language, I also enjoy watching the networks from France, China, and Japan on my phone. Even without understanding the language, I think it still is able to provide a great insight into the cultures that produce the content. The channels available for portable devices have some really interesting characteristics. Some, like France 24, NHK, and Deutsche Welle, offer content in both their native languages as well as in English. So obviously this is ideal for American users who might not know another language. A channel like RT is produced by Russians and broadcasts in English. Other apps, meanwhile, like Tagesschau, part of the German network ARD, and CCTV, are exclusively provided in their native languages. All of these apps focus entirely on news content. Univision, the Spanish language network, is one of the few apps that I've come across that also offers content beyond news. They offer segments of popular telenovelas, which is, of course, a staple of Spanish language programming. As for cost, the vast majority of these apps are free. Others may cost anywhere from 99 cents to $1.99, but with a portable device, an iPhone, an iPod, or an iPad, you can start watching these networks in just a matter of seconds. And although our focus at this conference is television, it's worth noting the availability of global radio as well. Radio is available through the internet and apps to a far greater degree than television. Perhaps that's because it's easier to stream, and it certainly uses less bandwidth for the customer. But these are just another way that global broadcasting is making other cultures more accessible by downloading an app to your portable device. Of course, not everyone has an iPhone, an iPod, or an iPad, so there are other options as well. Another piece of technology worth mentioning that's making global television more accessible is Roku. I'm sure most of you have seen this device. Some of you probably have this device. It was originally introduced in 2008 primarily as a way to help stream Netflix content. Later, additional channels were added like Hulu and Pandora. Today, about 40 international channels are available through Roku. A few of them require a subscription fee, but the vast majority are free. There's a heavy emphasis on Asia, beyond China and Japan, particularly the Indian subcontinent. And there's also access to some African programming, which can be a rarity for some of these devices. So we have all of these things that provide an opportunity for us to consume foreign television content. But so what? What do we know about the degree to which these apps and availability of programming change perceptions of other cultures? To answer these questions, I'd like to provide a bit of a case study involving one particular online app and program. Annik Rubens is a German radio and television journalist, and late last year I had the good fortune to conduct an interview with her about a podcast she produces that was turned into an iTunes app. Her quote here sums up her feelings about the explosive ways in which technology is changing the availability of cultures. And it is her anecdotal experience that technology is making culture available and changing the ways that those cultures are perceived. Rubens is the creator of a podcast called Schlaflos in München, Sleepless in Munich. And she would often receive comments from listeners outside of Germany, particularly from China, Russia, and the United States, that she spoke too fast, and they had a really difficult time understanding her. So in 2007, she launched a second podcast called Slow German. The podcast consists of 6 to 7 minute clips of Rubens speaking about parts of German culture, movies, dating, politics. This particular screen capture is a podcast about television. And she delivers the information at a much slower pace that intermediate speakers can understand. Shortly after Slow German debuted online, the app was launched on the iTunes store. Rubens doesn't know exactly how many people have downloaded Slow German, although she says about 70 new subscribers download it every month. She gets about 20 emails a month suggesting topics for her to address. And she firmly believes that Slow German has changed listeners' perceptions about German culture. She realizes that many people are getting the app and go to the website just to be able to brush up on the language before traveling to Germany. But she also observed that people's views of Germany have evolved. They grow beyond the historic negatives of World War II. They realize there's more to Germany than punctuality, dirndls, and Sauerbraten. She's had listeners tell her that the podcast has reduced their anxiety about traveling to or interacting with the German culture, and she firmly believes that her effort has, in its own small way, contributed to a cultural exchange and greater understanding among people. Granted, Rubens doesn't represent one of the global networks I've discussed, but the lessons we can take away from her shed light on the power of the access provided by cable, the internet, and portable devices. This is a relatively new area of research interest for me, and there are many directions I would like to go with this in the future. And I think that all scholars have some interesting directions we could go with the portable devices, because there's a great deal to learn, particularly as it relates to the area of traditional media effects. One is Gerbner's cultivation analysis, which is the idea that heavy exposure to television skews our perceptions of the real world. Some of the literature suggests that this is largely due to American producers creating unrealistic realistic portrayals of other cultures for American audiences. I think it would be fascinating to explore the degree to which the availability of foreign networks might limit the cultivation effect. If a viewer can see directly what happens in a culture, does it somehow negate the effects of heavy exposure to fictional portrayals? The uses and gratifications perspective of media effects research posits that we all have motives to explain our own individual media use. We know that people use media for entertainment, surveillance, and social interaction, as well as diversion. We also know from Papacarisi and Rubin's 2000 study that people use computers and online content for interpersonal utility, to pass the time, and for information-seeking behaviors. Are there similar motives involved with these portable devices? What motives do people have for seeking out content from a foreign television network? A uses and gratification study would be an interesting way to explore these questions. And finally, much of the research I've conducted about global media to date has focused extensively on Europe, with Asia as a distant second, but mostly as it applies to China and Japan. But what about the third world? There's far less information about nations in Africa and developing nations in Asia. Does the influx of new technology increase the digital divide? To what degrees are African nations left behind when they can't produce websites or apps to share their culture with the rest of the world? We should make sure as scholars to ensure that their interests are not forgotten as we move forward with studying these new ways to make global cultures available to more people. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to be making the jump, and next presenter will be Deborah Tudor from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale.
Thanks, Ben. I wouldn't want to be mistaken for an Edwardsville type. Good afternoon. My presentation is called Mobilizing Television. It's shifting the conversation a little bit because what I'm primarily concerned with in this little bit of my research is looking at the ideological underpinnings of mobile media in terms of their aesthetics, socio-political elements, and economics. And I want to look at how these various dialectical formations interact and overall place them in a sort of long historical timeline that goes back to the mid-20th century and the way that we've thought about home movie technology. We all know there's a lot of different styles of adaptation and transformation when people mobilize television content, and these varying styles are really not just simply modifications of television production to suit technological requirements, nor are they simply mimicry of the mothership. What we're looking at are these really complex discursive formations that have been formed by very, interrelated determinations, the type of things that we've discussed about impacting television aesthetics all along. This flexibility of style, I think, is best understood as a feature of neoliberal culture, which functions through a recalibration of groups in relation to the dynamism of local markets. In Ailhwa Ong's view, the scholar's last name is spelled O-N-G. This neoliberal logic is conceptualized as a migratory technology of governing that interacts with situated sets of elements and circumstances, and it's a technology of governance that seeks to optimize the behaviors of groups embedded in local but globalized cultures. So the concept of mobility itself is one that derives from and sustains neoliberal culture through multiple formations: labor mobility across the globe, mobility in the sense of adaptability in terms of career, and mobility enacted through neoliberal emphasis on the individual capability for self-improvement and the promised social mobility that would follow. This type of mobility, I think, can be linked with the unbundling that is often used as a way to frame the transformation of television content to mobile aesthetics. And this unbundling, I think, can be looked at as a neoliberal practice that is an adaptive economic mobility. Culturally, though, this unbundling also creates milieus in which it can govern the social behaviors of audiences and encourage ways for them to interact and form a type of social television. Specifically, I want to look at a couple of case studies. I think I'll start with Parks and Recreation, the NBC Thursday night comedy. Parks and Recreation has recently published on the web a series called April and Andy's Road Trip. This is not locked to any technology. It can be viewed on your tablet, your computer, or your phone, and it's using an aesthetic that replicates closely the look of the television series while also referencing a type of street realism and valorization of the personal everyday activity that cell phones encourage, cell phone cameras. April and Andy's Road Trip unbundles Parks and Recreation into segments that work as standalone comedy bits, allowing sketches to exist outside an episode of the sitcom. Nick Marks identifies comedy as a genre that's really driven a lot of cross-platform programming, and one in which unbundling allows actors to perform skits and to enact, work out ideas that don't have any place in the rigidly standardized 30-minute sitcom format. However, we can also read these segments not as dependent parts of the show, but as their own little text and as artifacts that the industry values for potential profit in rebundling and extending the viewer's relationship into the world of social television. April and Andy's Road Trip, which is viewable, uses high-key lighting, standard camera setups, adapted from the show. The show is shot on a mid-range Sony digital camera, not one of the high-end ones. They often use available lighting, whip pans, no precise blocking, and that's very similar to a lot of what we shoot on our mobile phones, although theirs is deliberate. It's really an aesthetic that you can describe as sort of smartphone shooting. At one point in this, April, one of the characters, does address the camera directly, and while that can mean that there's a third person there, it also reminds us of the lens flip feature on most of our smartphones, that where we do hold it out and record ourselves in various settings. This kind of strategy, I think, equalizes the production and reception axes of this project, and audience members with similar vacation experiences can read the text from the positioning of seeing these as if they were Facebook videos or video text sent by their own friends. In fact, on the website, viewers, and this is part of that governance of socialized behaviors, 5 minutes, can contribute their own road pics, which are then electronically pinned to a map of the United States. The mobile content promotes a local interaction, which is that kind of governance, and it's really binding the audience, I think, more deeply into the textual system of the program and helping to solidify the ways in which the audience kind of incorporates the show into their daily life. What's interesting about the smartphones versus the historical Super 8 and 8mm home cameras is that those cameras were sold starting in the mid-century as ways of promoting family togetherness. So ideologically, they were, high-end leisure tools marketed at the white, middle, and upper class that promoted the recording of family togetherness. The Bell and Howell manuals, for example, that came with that gave you tips for shooting your children, for shooting at birthdays, not pets so much, and they also gave you little tips so you could shoot very much in Hollywood-style conventions. And this was a kind of strategy that also reinforced a kind of gender divide in the family. It's almost always dad being shown with the Super 8 and, mom in the picture waving with the kids. But if we turn that around and look at how the smartphone dialectic operates, we are looking at an instrument that everybody in the family has, and it doesn't any longer promote this kind of centralized, unified togetherness. Instead, it promotes a number of diverse views on the same event. I also think that it's critical to look at the way smartphones are marketed as a familial object, because they still share some of that older sort of ideological underpinning of the Super 8 in the sense of family togetherness, but it's a neoliberalized type of togetherness in which it's a diffused family, separated geographically, that can use the smartphone camera to connect with each other, connect with video phones. And so we're looking at a dispersed family family, and it encourages and supports the type of neoliberalized labor and leisure bleeding into each other. I've got like, what, a minute? Okay. I think if you look at the opposite end of the aesthetic spectrum from Parks and Recreation, I don't have time to do a full discussion, but I would encourage you to look at 24 Conspiracy, because this is a web series that was developed in England off the TV series, and it was locked to the Vodafone system, so you could only see it on that particular type of technology. So in terms of an economic strategy of unbundling, it does depart from the show, creating secondary characters, but it's only viewable in one type of situation. And it was pretty much rejected by viewers, and then when it was later put into a box set of 24 DVDs, it was also something of a flop. It was trumpeted as a big extra, but it really, their analysis of their sales said that it didn't really help much with that. So I think what you've got there is a sort of a demonstration of the limits of how you can use unbundling for mobile media to govern social behaviors. So I'm going to stop there because I'm out of time. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Bryce. And last but not least, we have Bryce Peake from, apparently, as the program says, just from the USA. So you're a man of America, Bryce. Now, Bryce is a colleague of mine also at the University of Oregon as well. So we'll let him get set up and take over.
Hypothetically. There we go. Oh, sorry, we have login issues here at the UO. Full screen. There we go. All right, so unlike a lot of scholars today, my paper doesn't actually come from a larger body of work that I've been doing, but instead a question that was posed by one of my colleagues, and they asked me what I, as a scholar of listening and nationalism and colonialism in the Mediterranean, could really contribute to a conversation about televisual aesthetics in the United States. And I said, I can provide a lot of things. I just hope that some of them are useful. And so I started with thinking about televisions inside department stores. You're seeing a lot of sitcoms being played on the screens at JCPenney and GameStop. And I was going to start by applying Muzak theories to those and contrasting approaches that talk about Muzak as false consciousness with my own work that talks about Muzak in the Mediterranean as a site for negotiating national identities. But what I noticed standing in GameStop watching Big Bang Theory and then going to JCPenney down the mall a little farther is a lot of those are very pixelated kind of television shows being played. And then thinking about my own experiences at home, you know, watching Fifth Element, which is a terrible movie to start with on my Roku, it was very, very pixelated on my television. Watching Mad Men yesterday on my iPad, incredibly pixelated. Watching YouTube videos of dogs skateboarding, incredibly pixelated. And so the question came to me, the question's been kind of boiling in me for a while, is how do we deal with lo-fi violations in an age of high definition screens? Why do we like lo-fi content? Why don't we see as much complaining about it? And my answer has a lot to do with different things, but this is how my topic has come, and my title, the subtitle is telling: The Specters of Napster and Stealing Cable. So my central question, you know, why in the age of high-def televisions and digital cable do we tolerate low fidelity in online streaming television? And what historical moment separated the televisual logic and the online televisual aesthetic? So I start with watching Mad Men yesterday on Netflix. This is a screen cap. It was terrible, but I love Mad Men, so why did I keep watching? Well, I'm going to argue that behind a televisual aesthetic experience is a whole network of other aesthetic moments that we've kind of enjoyed, that build up to that televisual moment. And what I'm going to do in my paper is breeze through the first three that are visual to really get to the audio element. I start with an ad campaign that was ran on YouTube and on television called Whopper Virgins in 2008. And what this ad campaign did was it used pixelization and handheld cameras like cell phone cameras to give some semblance of reality, to say that this is a campaign that's based on reality. And basically they went to untouched villages, gave people a Whopper and gave people a Big Mac, and people said Whopper good, Big Mac bad, and they said it's real because it was shot on a terrible camera and it's pixelated. Then, that experience builds off another web phenomenon, Lonely Girl 15. Lonely Girl 15 in 2006, it actually ended in 2008, was a weblog of a young lady who told us about her life in high school and the terrible boy troubles she was having and the anxiety about education. And she had over 1 million followers. And it came out in 2008 that this wasn't actually a weblog. It was a scripted online sitcom by a couple low-end producers. And the web went nuts. They were outraged. They couldn't believe that they would be sold this kind of content on the web. It looked so authentic. And so there's a level of that involved in our watching of Pixelated Mad Men. That goes back to the original purpose behind...
Presents this program in color.
Behind YouTube and users' obsession with YouTube, Kevin Driscoll's argued that kind of our experience of YouTube as it consists today really started based on YouTube's purpose for archiving TV shows that weren't on TV anymore. And some of these TV shows, as you can tell here, are terribly pixelated. Some of them I found online, you just can't even tell what's going on. But people were still going back to them because they were excited about the pleasure of watching them. And what overwrites that experience, the pixelation, which is the important point I'm getting to, is the nostalgia and the pleasure of watching Hogan's Heroes, even though you can't watch it on TV. So the question that I'm going to pose and stop our episode of Hogan's Heroes for is, where did that pleasure come from? At one point, did we enjoy or gain pleasure from listening or watching things that aren't that high quality? And I would argue that moment comes from Napster. That at the moment of Napster, there's a division in pleasurable experiences. You have the pleasurable experience of watching TV and enjoying TV, and you have the pleasurable experience of getting that experience for free. One of the best theorists to use to talk about kind of this pleasure dynamic is a semiotician that is rather obscure in the age of literary studies, and it's Jan Mukarovsky. And Mukarovsky says that aesthetics is purely about pleasure, and that the way aesthetics work is that what is pleasurable gets defined as the norm. And if something more pleasurable than the norm comes along, then the norm breaks in half, or it spins in a vortex out of control. Now, what happens with television is that, or with Napster and content, is that you have a choice. You have a choice between CDs in the year 1999, which have great quality, but involve spending money and time, and you have this stuff online that you can download for free. Now, Napster at one point was up to, I believe the estimate was 7,000 gigs, including kind of repeat tracks. And everybody's downloading at the same time. Now, why is everybody downloading instead of going to the store to buy them? Well, the obvious answer is to preserve economic capital. But there's a more interesting answer that has to do with Putnam's analysis of television in the book Bowling Alone. Now, Putnam's kind of subtext is that people are not spending enough time together because they've spent all of their symbolic capital and economic capital to buy a TV. And in order to get the cultural capital of watching TV, you can't really spend time with other people. You've spent these other mediums. And what happens with the MP3 phenomenon in Napster is you have a choice. You can go to the store and you can spend your economic capital, which was $15 at the time for a CD, plus the amount of time it takes to beg your parents to ignore the fact that there's a parental advisory sticker on the thing. Or you can download it for free and just put up with the fact that it's terrible quality. And that's the moment I'd like to argue that happens. And so to demonstrate that, I want to play two tracks from the same time period. One not from Napster, burnt from a CD, and then a track I actually still have from Napster. And you can hear just how terrible that quality is. So this is... So that's the same genre that's popular at the time. You can hear it. It's crisp. It sounds good. This is what happens when you download it from Napster. If you listen to the high end, like the cymbals, you get the kind of shatter of digital artifacts. We learned to deal with it. We didn't care. Why? Because we didn't have to pay for it. And it's at that moment that we come to kind of split the difference between a web aesthetic and a regular kind of, I don't want to say reality aesthetic, but you know what the division I'm trying to make. But I want to go one step further and argue that that kind of split has another history that's hidden deep down inside experiences like Netflix. Now remember, with Napster, you're stealing the tracks, more or less, right? There's a moment that, well, how to put this better? With Napster, it's the mainstreaming of a process that goes on for many, many years, and that's stealing cable. I grew up in a neighborhood where we would get the cool little junctures like this one and hook up everybody, or we'd climb up the telephone pole, remove the channel blocks, and drag the cable down the way to somebody else's house. And the image quality was terrible, and the sound was terrible, and it needed tracking because the image would shift like this all the time. It was the same concept in the same economy, but instead, this kind of economy, this illegal economy, was blocked by cable stations because, hey, you're stealing our cable. And one of the ways in which that ended up being blocked was through the transition to digital cable, right? With digital cable, you no longer get aired channels, and if you're not in a good place of reception, you just get a blue screen. So what people in my neighborhood took to was a new economy. And so one person bought cable, and everybody chipped in, about 8 households chipped in, plus $5, and then we told that person what TV show we wanted to watch. They went and bought a VCR because DVDs players were on the rise, and VCRs were pretty cheap at Goodwill, and a bunch of VHS tapes, and they would record them and pass them around and share them. Now, in Peoria, in 1997, this gets broken up in a lot of the housing projects, and it's classified under a of defrauding public utility. It's stealing cable, and they're busting up this illegal piracy ring. But at the same time, the same thing is going on Napster, except it wasn't defrauding a public utility. Now, the class dimensions behind that are very interesting, and Ben's giving me that look that I can't tell you. Oh, he's giving me the 2 minutes. Sorry, I thought that was a 1 minute. The class dimensions of that are very interesting in the sense that, on the one hand, sharing those videotapes around and stealing cable was defrauding a public utility. But so was the process of stealing stuff from Napster. The difference was the mediums on which it happened. The internet was the new frontier of public democracy. Things should be free. We should share everything. But at the same time, that same public had an outcry about the stealing of cable. What all of this is to say, and by way of conclusion, is that where we started with aesthetically, with Mad Men being super pixelated and enjoying watching it and the pleasure we get from it, it looks like stolen cable to me. It looks like the kind of bad quality that comes from these histories. And in order to more deeply understand the televisual experience and modern televisual aesthetics, we have to be aware of the aesthetic experiences that are networked in behind our direct experiences. And that's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Very good. And that actually, so thank you everybody on the panel. It gives us time for some questions as well. So I will, if you'd like to raise your hand, and I can run the mic to you.
Totally not being rude, because this is for Bryce, because I sent you a tweet and regarding this very issue, in fact, and had I known you were going to present this, I would have not tweeted this to you. Let me just go back to what it is, because you had to come here and do your thing. But what there was involved, you sent a message back to me saying analog and vinyl not the same, because vinyl it's physics. The sound is completely different. There is a certain depth and that's there with vinyl. Absolutely. Can it be, can you say the same for analog? You can't, because the quality is not, when you're receiving it visually, the quality is not there. What I tweeted back to you was, I think that with analog, there is the pleasure of not just the analog signal itself, but the nostalgia with the programming that was presented in analog when it was when it was there, and then you had to come and do your thing. So do you think that nostalgia is driving not just the Napster point, which I never thought about before, and it's very, very interesting how the tolerance of crap, because we all stole it, and so hey, we can tolerate crap because now we have to pay for it. But nostalgia is also driving that sense of combined with this. It's like it's so beautiful, man. It was just as crappy as when I was a kid, and that, do you think that's what's driving it? Because if you were to really watch something like the $6 Million Man or Hogan's Heroes in digital, I mean, come on.
Right. I think there's interesting issues going on. So, I have to speak into the microphone. I'm sorry. So I think there's two interesting issues going on. So in terms of the vinyl analog kind of debate, one of the things that I like to think about in terms of listening to vinyl, because I still have vinyl because I'm a jazz fan, and that's what I love to hear it on. And the difference between vinyl and analog now can't be talked about as two historically separate moments. So in order to understand vinyl, you have to realize that that experience of vinyl is regimented through the crappiness of MP3s. And so that nostalgia acts as that channel through. So if you're thinking about, let's see, if I'm listening to John Coltrane's Love Supreme on vinyl, it sounds way better remastered digitally, right? Except there's these weird little tinges, whereas the vinyl vibrates. Now, the difference between stealing a CD and watching online, that's a hard one to deal with, because both revolve around processes of taking out part of the audio spectrum. It's just with kind of the online content with YouTube and Napster, more of that spectrum is taken out in order to shrink the file size down. So you get the weird artifacts, in the high stream, whereas you won't get those in the CD. To think about that in terms of, just as crappy as I remember it, I think it depends upon the medium, because some mediums are better if they're crappy, and some mediums aren't, right? So that's the long way I would answer that question.
Very good. Thank you. I've got a question for Bryce as well, just to pick on you a little bit more. And it's actually a question which went up on Twitter while you were speaking, so I'm going to ask it from there. The Twitter back channel. It's a couple of things. One of the things I wonder is whether lo-fi TV, your tolerance for lo-fi TV depends on the screen on which you're watching it. If you're watching it on a large plasma high-def screen, then you're going to have much less tolerance for it than if you're watching on an iPod video or on a computer screen, because we have developed a tolerance for the fact that if you're watching on a computer screen, it's probably online, it's probably going to be pixelated, and you're okay with it. So that's one aspect of it. And my corollary to that, if you're looking at the audio, is that I listen to a lot of music in my car. My car stereo system sucks. You can't tell the difference between a CD and 128K MP3 in my car. And they both sound about the same as FM radio as well. And so in that context, you're not thinking about this doesn't sound as good as it could. You're just listening. And so that's my corollary there. And my other question is, do a lot of people simply not care / not notice about quality of pixelation? The same as even on a relatively good stereo, I have trouble telling the difference between 128K MP3 and CD because I don't have a particularly great ear. I am positing that possibly a lot of people don't notice when something is slightly pixelated. Sure, if it's the analog TV aerial with bad weather and it's snow and etc., you're going to notice that. But whether just simply a lot of people aren't worried about image quality in the way in which perhaps those of us who focus more on television or film might be.
Okay, I'm going to start with question 3 and work my way 3 to 1 to 2. So your third question is spot on. You're right. I think a lot of people just don't care, and I think that would have been a point that I could have made clear, is that really my thinking was about the people who do care, right? And I think that you bring up a really good point about positionality and how people's positions within different dynamics of power, etc., really affects that visual taste, how they see, how they listen, etc. So I think that's a really good pointed question that I don't have the perfect answer for. But I think it does allow me a good gateway into thinking about questions 1 and 2, in the sense that, so your first question was, do people think about the experience of an iPod video differently than they think about their big 60-inch Blu-ray, high-def TV? Yes and no. I think, again, it goes back to regimentation. If you live on your on your Blu-ray 60-inch TV, or you live on your iPod video, that's going to adjust your kind of specifications. And again, thinking about your audio experience in your car, I just got a car with a better sound system. And when I had my old car, I wouldn't have noticed at all, because I would have thought, this is my car, this is how my car sounds, and that's a car stereo, yay. But now with my new car, which has a better sound system, I'm always listening to it differently. I'm listening to my new car as if it was like my sound system in my living room. And I'm like, these are comparable, but the sound system in the car a little less. So, I mean, it goes back to, what are you listening in your car through? Are you listening in your car as if, hey, I'm in my car and this is the audio quality standard for a car? Or am I in my car listening to this and this is the, I'm comparing it or listening to it through the audio quality that I experience in my big multi-million-dollar sound system in my living room? I don't have one of those, though.
Great. Other questions? I guess if not, we got a couple extra minutes, but just sort of join me in sort of thanking the panel again. I thought it was very well done. And I guess